Hi, my name is Leah Thomas, and thank you so much for coming to this Intersectional Environmentalist panel that was put on by the lovely brand Thousand Fell. Love them so much, have a pair of their sneakers, and I'm just so happy that they brought this wonderful, diverse, amazing group of environmental activists together to share some knowledge. Some of you all might know me. I posted something last week that I wasn't really expecting anyone to see, but the internet is a scary place. So a lot of people retweeted my graphic Environmentalist for Black Lives Matter, which also included the definition of intersectional environmentalism. I wrote that after waking up one day just being so sad and so traumatized about the police shootings and all the death of Black and brown lives. And as an environmentalist, I just really, really wanted to see my community come together and support Black lives, because climate justice is a part of social justice and environmentalism is all intertwined. And in my honest opinion, if your environmentalism does not include the protection of Black and brown people, does it really stand for justice at all? And with that, I would like to call on each panelist to just give a really quick introduction about some of the incredible work that you do. And I'll go ahead and start with Tori.
Hi everyone, so I'm Tori Choi and I'm originally from Hong Kong, but I'm based in the UK. It's currently 12 a.m. here, but I'm a night owl, so it's fine. I helped run and co-found a project called Self for Climate Action, which is currently being rebranded, and it initially started as a sailing project in Cartagena in Colombia, which was aiming to take 30 Latin American, Indigenous and Caribbean youth to the UN Climate Conference SB52 in Bonn, Germany. And yeah, we're facilitating an online program at the moment, and we've recently partnered with the German government to host a 3-week event in conjunction with the UN. And the whole point of the project is to amplify these voices in places of power so that they can tell their stories and also have a seat at the table at decision-making processes.
And then if we want to go on the little screen, we're going to go next to Tayina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Tayina Gilles. I am a medical student in the state of Florida. My work with environmentalism is more through the lens of medicine, just trying to work at the level of preventative medicine and getting more physicians involved with activism, so we're not always just treating the disease, but preventing them before they happen.
And Teju.
My name is Teju Adisa-Farrar, based here in Oakland, California, and I am a writer, geographer, and poet. My work is focused on environmental and cultural equity, so making sure that we're talking about the connections between all these systems of oppression and helping people support and participate in alternatives.
That was amazing. And Dee or Diandra?
Hey guys, so I'm Diandra. I'm currently based in Texas, but have been in New York for the past like 5 years. I'm a conscious curator, so I explore how we sustainably consume things and ideas surrounding the environment, social issues, and general consumption. I've been using my platform to advocate for brands creating sustainable processes, and to curate resources that help people explore their own relationship with consumption, all with the hope of reshaping consumption culture.
And next we'll go with Amber.
Hello, beautiful people. Please excuse my grease and dirty shirt. I just got off a farm shift. I'm Amber Tamm. I am from Brooklyn, New York, and when I say that, I mean my family has been here for 4 generations. I'm a floral designer, horticulturalist, and a farmer, rural and urban. I've pretty much done every facet of earth stewardship. I farmed across the US for 2.5 years. And yeah, right now I'm doing a lot of advocacy for access to public lands in New York City to attack food insecurity for low-income families, and just food sovereignty and regenerative agriculture in general.
And Isaias.
Hi everyone, I'm the creator of Career Bound Vegan. I create accessible environmental education concepts that really interconnect with forms of zero waste, veganism, environmental justice, and really making sure that all concepts are very intertwined towards the whole collective climate movement. I'm formerly the co-creator of Alluvium magazine, which we highlight Black, Indigenous, people of color environmentalists through climate justice storytelling and really focus on just really showcasing their own work through environmental creativity art.
That was beautiful. And Jordan?
Matakiapi, hello, my relatives. My name is Jordan Marie Brings through White Horses Daniel. I'm Koichasha Lakota from Koichasha Oyate, federally known as the Lower Bull Sioux Tribe in Central South Dakota. Currently, right now, I'm on Indigenous Abenaki Wabanaki territory in Maine, but originally reside on occupied Tongva lands in Los Angeles. I'm the founder and organizer of Rising Hearts, which is a grassroots-led group just working at the intersectionality of climate, racial, social, economic justice, because you can't have one without the other, and really focus a lot of my work really kind of uplifting the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and really calling attention or bringing attention to the ongoing historical violence that, you know, Indigenous communities have been facing. And it's come at a time too where it perfectly, I mean, sadly and heartbreakingly intersects with the police brutality and violence happening with our Black Indigenous relatives and communities. I'm also a producer. I'm a trail and marathon athlete working to bring and help increase Indigenous representation and visibility on those platforms. And yeah, just working really hard to try and dismantle white supremacy with y'all.
And the lovely Genesis.
Hi, my name is Genesis Butler, and I'm a climate activist, and I focus on climate change and the destruction that animal agriculture has on the planet. And I'm also the lead organizer for Youth Climate Save, and that's a global movement that focuses on talking about how animal agriculture is destroying the planet.
And lastly, but certainly not least, Kevin.
Thank you, Leah. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin J Patel. I'm a youth climate activist and environmental activist here in Los Angeles, California, also known as Tongva Land. I've been a climate activist for over 8 years, really fighting for my community. You know, activism is not a choice for me, it's a survival technique, and I'm sure it's for everyone else. And I'm also the founder and executive director of One Up Action, really trying to resource bank for marginalized communities and give back to our communities so that other marginalized communities and other activists can really take action.
Thank you all so much for being here today. So the first question I'm just going to open up for the entire group for anyone to answer. For environmentalists that are still kind of struggling to find the links between the Black Lives Matter movement and the environmental movement, what would you like to say to them? What data could you present, or what personal experience can you present to them as an environmentalist that these things are very linked? Because I often say that I can't separate my Blackness from my environmentalism. It's there, it's intertwined, but I would like to open up the floor to you all.
I can start. I think many of us know that the US was created on stolen land, made by stolen people. And so obviously there could not be any relationship between Blackness and the environment that's more embedded in the land and the agriculture. They had to clear the land literally of Indigenous people and Indigenous stewardship practices, and brought over enslaved Africans to work for free to mass produce crops and start the extraction of natural resources from this country. So even before the US was incorporated as a country, the development of this space, of this geography, has been able to happen because of the exploitation of Black bodies and the decimation of Indigenous populations and the extraction of natural resources from the land. So it's not necessarily a theoretical question, it's very much a literal question about the social history and geography of this country. I'll stop there, but I will add that part of what I do is helping educate people around some of these interconnected issues. And so next week I'm doing a session on the connections between Black liberation and environmentalism. So in that workshop, I will also be providing resources and more information and specific data that talks really about how these things are not different things, but actually the same thing.
I just want to butt in really quick and follow that up. That was absolutely flawless how you said that. Wow. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think coming from New York City and my family being low income here for a very long time, I think one of the most potent ways that people have seen this is through environmental racism, which can lead directly into food apartheid. So, you know, for those that don't know those terms, just understanding that where large communities of brown and Black people live, you know, the only viable foods are fast foods and corner stores with processed foods. And it's not until gentrifiers and other non-brown people move into those environments that then organic produce and whole foods and other things pop up. So that's another way why there's emphasis on Black Lives Matter, that we should have access to fresh, nutrient-dense food just for ourselves. We shouldn't need others to come in and bring that with them.
I'll just lead up to what Amber said. She really put it together. It's like when you're talking about Black lives and you're talking about brown lives, you're also talking about marginalized communities. I live in South Central Los Angeles, and we're going to talk about statistics. You know, 55% of those who live within 3 kilometers of hazardous waste facilities are people of color. 47% of people who live critically close of hazardous chemical factories are either Black or Latino or even brown. Black people are exposed to 50% more air pollution than white people. Communities with more people of color are 40% more likely to have unlawfully unsafe drinking water. So if you're looking at statistics wise, we can see that Black and brown and Indigenous and as well as people of color are literally being affected by these destructive industries more than affluent community members. I'm a testament to that, as well as other community members in South Central Los Angeles are a testament to that, how destructive industries are causing health issues such as cancer, heart palpitations, and other health defects because of what is going on. And also with the food inequalities, we're literally living in a food prison. So we don't know, a lot of our community members and a lot of the young people here don't know where food comes from. They think food comes from fast foods, but they don't know it grows on a farm. So that's something that people need to be aware of when we're talking about Black Lives Matter. It really does, it does matter, because honestly, they're all going to be affected by the climate crisis. Social justice is climate justice. So I just wanted to add that, because everyone that has spoken so far really bring the heat to the fire and spoke truth to power. So yeah.
I just want to add in one just quick tidbit is, like, when you look at the root of the problem, people need to look at, colonization, colonialism is the root of all of this that created this harmful, destructive infrastructure that is purposely designed to keep Black, brown, Indigenous, immigrant communities and marginalized communities to not benefit from this, systemic racist process. And so I think when you have to look at the inner relations of everything is connected. And when we start seeing environmental destruction happening within our communities, within 3 kilometers, within treaty lands, treaty territory, like, it's happening to our people, to our relatives, it's not happening, in near cities, in the rich suburbs. If a project was being proposed, just like it was up in Bismarck for Standing Rock in the Dakota Access Pipeline, that got shut down. And where did it go? It went through treaty territory. And so we have so many communities that are being impacted heavily, and our lives are being treated as expendable. And people need to really see that connection of colonialism has created this infrastructure that we're not meant to benefit from. And that's what I think with this movement now, with Black Lives Matter and what's happening in this uprising, we're going to start seeing it crumble. And I'm excited to continue this work and keep the momentum going.
I also just want to make a point about representation of voices in places of power. As someone who has attended previous events, especially within like COPs and UN spheres, the representation of Black and Brown and Indigenous people is seriously lacking, and these are literally places of power where decisions are being made. And time again, we see that like people of color, Black and Brown and Indigenous people are so poorly represented in places of decision making and places where, you know, there is a say about how environmental degradation proceeds. And I think that that's such a really fundamental thing that needs to be tackled, is this idea that these voices and these lives and these perspectives are seen and honored as well. Also from, you know, I guess the perspective of Indigenous biodiversity and like taking care of the land, and all of these perspectives that we have so much to learn from in terms of how we can actually find solutions, or rather just try and create a more equitable planet.
I would like to add a quick thing on to Jordan's point that it's completely accurate that this is all by design, that communities of color are the ones who are suffering more from pollution. And I think it's really important that we understand our history of racism and colonialism so that as we go forward and we're trying to make a better community, we don't repeat those same mistakes. Because I think it's very easy for people to see, you know, a Whole Foods go up and they're like, the neighborhood's getting better. But actually those people have now been pushed even further away from those safe places.
And just a reminder to everyone watching, we'll be answering your Q&As at the end. We're gonna have 20 minutes to answer your questions. So you can use the Q&A function or on Zoom, or you can submit questions on Instagram. And going off script for a little bit, but I think the language that we use is incredibly important, and people are saying the phrase white supremacy a lot, and I think some people think that that's a very scary term. Well, it is, because it's a very scary thing, and it is also permeating the environmental movement. So does anyone have a good example of the ways that white supremacy kind of permeates the environmental movement and what that means? Because I think when people hear that, they start to think about the KKK and they don't think about their fellow environmental activists who might be perpetuating that.
I just want to quickly say that one of the best analogies for me of like white supremacy and people not understanding the intersection is the number of people who I, you know, have seen at climate protests within the global north chant climate justice, but do not speak up about Black Lives Matter, do not speak up about Brown, Indigenous, and people of color. And I think that is literally them hijacking a term for their own understanding of what environmentalism means. It's environmentalism that serves the privileged few, and that for me is like kind of on par with environmental white supremacy.
So I'd love to touch on, I think that maybe Leah, this is kind of what you meant, where it's like not so overt, but it's kind of like hidden within the system. And I think that we've all kind of been able to see that a little over the past decade with all of these crazy hurricanes that have been happening, and kind of where communities get more support in terms of recovery goes. So I think that just contextually, people in the Latinx community specifically don't often refer to themselves as, oh my gosh, sorry. People in the Latinx community don't typically refer to themselves as environmentalists, because there's this like notion that that's just like white people who eat granola. But a lot of people don't know that the Latinx community currently ranks the highest as the most concerned about climate change in national polls, and has the potential to be such a strong advocate for environmental movements, and they're just not marketed to. And I think that this is largely because of the lack of support, AKA Puerto Rico, that we get in terms of what's happening with hurricanes. So I think that after seeing what happened with Katrina and Sandy and Harvey, they were so devastating and disproportionately impacted communities of color. And not only are these communities already set up to get hit the worst because of poor development, but they also get the least amount of support to recover. And that is, I think, something that we all need to be able to wrap our heads around as something that contributes to white supremacy, even though you might not recognize it as, you know, very overtly racist.
And I think too,
I just want to.
Oh, sorry. Oh, so sorry. I just wanted to say too, like, as everyone's mentioning, that white supremacy lives within institutions, and just like everyone had mentioned about environmental colonialism, that these systems have been created through the lens of, you know, cis, white, heteronormative males. They've developed these institutions, these corporations through agricultural. They took land from indigenous and black folks. They, you know, the plastic and oil industry murdered and destroyed so many communities. And there's so much, you know, institution heteronormativity too has erased and murdered a lot of two-spirit and queer trans folks, that has erased them from their own geography and their own relationship to the land. So I think too, when we think about white supremacy, we need to think how that's been connected within our own cultures and how that's been attempted to be erased.
Absolutely. On another topic, I would love to talk to Amber.
I just want to butt in.
Oh yeah, go ahead. And then my next question for you too.
I think that one of the biggest things that can show you that is just land access. When you look at how much land in the US that white people own, you can, that shows you, because land is power. Land is housing, land is food, land is something that can last through generations. And so thinking about land as all of that, and then Black and brown communities not having very much access to it, that says it all. And I think a really great example for me right now that's actually happening right now is, like, I've been advocating for public land access forever. And, you know, I've been laboring, trying to get grants and writing emails and trying to reach out to people who own public parks in New York City. And just even that terminology is crazy, that they own public parks in New York City. And I don't know if anyone's been following, but maybe a week ago, a really famous white 50-year-old chef got access to a public park. And it's because, you know, of where he's at. And so I think that specific example, which is happening to me right now, and him and I are working through collaboration, it's all about access to the land.
And then Amber and Genesis, something that's kind of started to be introduced into, I guess, specifically the white environmentalist dialogue, because a lot of Indigenous people have historically had a better relationship to the land. So regenerative organic agriculture is definitely pulling on a lot of Black and brown wisdom. But one solution to climate change is regenerative organic agriculture. So Genesis, I'd love to hear from you about the impacts of animal agriculture, how you got involved with this at such a young age. And Amber, after that, if you could kind of just talk to us a little bit about urban farming and also regenerative organic agriculture, or different ways that we can be better to the land.
So the way that I got involved in my activism was after I went vegan, I wanted to know what else I could do, because I knew that being vegan was something good for the planet, but I wanted to do more. So then I became an animal rights activist, and then I would go to protests all the time. And then after I got asked to do a TED Talk, and then I was thinking of what cause that I should do it on, and then I did research and figured out about how animal agriculture has such a big impact on climate change. So I thought this is so aligned with my message, so that this was information that had to get out there, because not a lot of people knew about it, because this isn't information that is talked about as much as it should be. So I gave my TED Talk on that, and then I became a climate activist because it's aligned. Veganism and climate activism is aligned, because when you're vegan, you're helping the climate, and climate activists want to help the planet. So it's aligned. So I think that it's information that needs to get out there, is how when you go vegan, you're able to help reverse climate change. Because if we were able to restore half of our native forests, we would be able to reverse climate change. So there's information like that that isn't shared as much as it should be, because people say, oh yeah, we want to reverse climate change, but then we say how, and people don't know how to. So it's information like that that needs to get out there, because if we stopped eating meat, which is it's not sustainable for the planet, so if we were able to stop eating meat, we'd be able to reverse climate change. So that information I want to share to get that out there more.
That was such a wonderful introduction to regenerative agriculture. I applaud you, Genesis, for all of the work that you're doing. I think on the grounds level, regenerative agriculture, I have a good feeling that everybody who's watching, especially the panelists, understand what regenerative agriculture is. Essentially, It's very much like permaculture, where it's just doing right by Mama Earth. Literally, that is the simplest definition I can give to it. And what that means is like, that can look like removing, emphasis on yield. That can look like removing chemmed out pesticides. That can look like, upping compost. That can look like Genesis was saying, less emphasis on meat and dairy in general. I think we all have a good understanding. I think what people miss about regenerative agriculture, which is heavily based on soil regeneration, is that there's cultural components. And like when we think about the term agriculture, there's a cultural component to it. And so what I'm presenting and what I'm asking people to understand about regenerative agriculture is it's more than just the technical practices. It's exactly what we're talking about. It's getting rid of the capitalistic, white, systematic, oppressive structure that has been agriculture for so long. And understanding that industrial agriculture is mirrored off of free labor of slaves. So regenerative agriculture is to get away from that. It's not about just using the right practices to, keep pushing out yield. It's also about dismantling the historic lens of agriculture. And it's also about empowering women farmers, empowering POC farmers, getting land access. All of those things are encompassed in regenerative agriculture. With that being said, I do want to let everybody know that there are organizations out there that claim regenerative agriculture and don't define it the way POC do. Our lens of regenerative agriculture is about us. It's about our cultural and social components. White people have a tendency to define it just as technical, scientific research and practices.
And I think that's so important because so many of those practices that you're talking about, that a lot of white environmentalists that are going into the regenerative territory, they're pulling that information and extracting it from Black and Brown communities, and the way that they have historically and culturally had better relationships with the land where they could kind of coexist. So that was such an amazing point, Amber. So thank you so much. And thank you, Genesis, for that. Isaias, I am personally such a fan of your platform. I love it so much. And we're also right in the middle of Pride. One of your most recent posts was about Pride merch. And I think that would be something really awesome if you could recap here for us to ask who's making your Pride merch and how is it made and why is that a topic that you wanted to discuss on your Instagram?
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing about Pride is that it's been so heavily commodified and capitalized, right? I think we need to understand that brands and corporations itself are not our friends, right? They're not here to, be friends with us. But it's also highlighting one injustice is the fact that a lot of queer folks are, solely sometimes rely on this as a big month to book gigs and campaigns. And it's so unfortunate too to see the lack of diversity and representation within Black and Brown trans women being hired to do these campaigns, right? It's usually like white cis gay males that are being hired. But I think the point of Who Made My Pride campaign is to shine light on these corporations of that fact of that if you're promoting collective and freedom and, solidarity with the queer community, essentially, why are you still funding private prisons? Why are you still enslaving Black and Brown bodies in different countries? That it is illegal to be gay. And also, like, their corporations themselves and the CEOs have, investors that are invested into anti-LGBT politics. So then it goes into the systems of like, how do you trust these brands, which is the rhetoric versus the reality. So I think the campaign itself is really to highlight that these brands' supply chain is under the work of Black and Brown bodies, and there's no protection over them. And I think that's, if they're able to generate this much capital per month for their brand, I'm pretty sure they're able to distribute that wealth and protection for their workers.
Thank you so much for that. Kevin, I would love to learn a little bit about your journey to climate activism and some of the organizations that you're a part of.
Yeah, of course. My journey really started, like I said in the beginning of my introduction, activism for me is a survival tool. My community, South Central Los Angeles, we're living amidst, not only a COVID-19 pandemic, we're in the midst of 3 pandemics, one in the White House, one with racism and discrimination, and then one with COVID-19. And a lot of us are not going, our Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities are the most affected by, COVID-19. And I just, with that being said, my whole start and journey for activism and really fighting for climate justice and environmental justice started with food inequality in my middle school year. So all 3 years throughout middle school, I used to talk about food inequality and talk about food prisons and where food came from, and talking about non-GMO foods and talking about organic foods, and just making sure that my peers understood it. But also, I was affected by air pollution and smog pollution, and now I have to live with heart palpitations for the rest of my life. So I have an irregular heartbeat, and with better part of my middle school years, I was in and out of the hospital a lot. So that really caused me to say, you know what, it's not just me that in my community that's being affected by air pollution and smog pollution. It's many and countless others that are being affected by this one issue. And they're getting asthma, they're getting all these other health issues. And so that's where I very much led into climate activism and took up the mantle within my community and said enough is enough, and really wanted to make sure that I can advocate for my community, but also make sure that my community has the resources to do so themselves, and bring up other leaders that can speak about climate justice and talk about what is happening in our community, and not just in my community, but around the world. It is not the rich and affluent communities that are affected with the climate crisis. I want to bring it back to white supremacy, because the climate movement is predominantly white. And I think when I was, I've been fighting for climate justice for over 8 years. I can tell you the truth. There was no such thing as a youth movement. And, for me, I was always getting involved with the adult organizations, which were usually all white led, and it tells the truth about what this country is, and what the movement really is about. So if we really want to make a difference, we really need to start bringing in more voices that are diverse, more Indigenous voices, more Black voices, more brown voices, many more people of color, because we're the ones that are being definitely affected by the climate crisis. I know we've done a great job at making sure that we're becoming more diverse, but I think there's a long road ahead of us to really recognize how really white the movement is. I've started and founded One Up Action, which is an organization, again, tasked with individual action, making sure if we can mobilize many young people on the streets, then we can definitely mobilize them to go back into the communities and take action. And we provide them the resources to do so. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing with my climate activism.
Well, that is so amazing, and more than
Thank
a
you.
lot of people that I know that are your age. That's so awesome. Jordan, I would love to learn a little bit more about your unique relationship with Indigenous communities. Also, I would love to know about the Running for Justice campaign, as well as why it's important to give attention to Indigenous communities because of the very unique environmental injustices that they're facing right now, and for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, we still are living in a society where Indigenous people are often left out of the conversation entirely. And having, grown up on the reservation for the first 9 years of my life and seeing the health disparities and seeing how my people were suffering, and seeing that, food deserts exist there. And where we were located just made it difficult to have like a good life, to have access to good quality healthcare, to grocery stores. That really motivated me by the time I was in 8th grade to want to move to DC and advocate for my people, for my relatives. And hopefully impact some sort of change. And I had no idea what that looked like, but I had the opportunity to go to DC. And then Standing Rock happened, and seeing the youth who ran over 2,000 miles to Washington, DC to oppose the pipeline and deliver the petition to President Barack Obama, seeing what they were doing and how they were using their voices and empowering themselves and each other, willing to fight for what is sacred, our water, our lands, and talking about these human rights violations, our water rights violations. inspired me to use my voice. And when I saw the dog attacks happen on Standing Rock, to the very youth that I had met and supported and ran with, that inspired me to start using my voice and start showing up. And I started organizing in DC, and started, making friends with the Piscataway natives who are indigenous to those lands. And then I started seeing people organizing on behalf of Native people, but not including indigenous people in those spaces. And so I started asserting myself to 350 DC, to the Sierra Club and other organizations, be like, why aren't you doing a land acknowledgement? Why didn't you invite the local Piscataway natives? Why don't you have indigenous people speaking to this? Why aren't we part of this organizing process? And so that's what gave me the idea to found Rising Hearts, is to really elevate and center indigenous voices, Black, brown voices in what we are fighting for, because we know what's best, we know where we're coming from, and to really build those relationships and partnerships. And as that development was going, I started learning more and more about the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And for a couple years, it just felt more and more like we were only talking about it within our communities. We were only seeing the families do all the work when law enforcement was not doing anything. And it just got to the point where enough was enough. And I'm like, I'm going to be doing a half marathon. I'm going to dedicate my bib number and put the hashtag MMIWG on it. Hopefully that'll spark conversation and get people to ask what this is. And it did. I did it again a year later. And in between that, I started organizing information panels to get the community to know what MMIW is and how they can help. But then that still wasn't enough. And then the Boston Marathon happened. And that's where I was just like, you know what? I need to do something for them so that they're not forgotten, to offer my prayers to them, to their family, to their communities, pray for justice, pray for healing, pray for them to be able to move forward, not necessarily move on because they're continuing mourning for their loved ones. And so I ran in prayer. I dedicated every single mile to 26 Indigenous women and girls. And I've been doing that ever since with my running platform, Running for Justice, because that's what I am doing. I'm running to raise awareness and for justice, because this epidemic and injustice has been happening too long, and we do not get the visibility and the attention that it needs. And thankfully, we have 2 Native women in Congress that are heavily advocating for change and for the Violence Against Women Act, and to start protecting our women in our communities. But it's a new purpose with my running, and it's something that I'm going to continue doing and running in prayer. And I've, instead of just competing too, Global Running Day, I ran for Breonna Taylor, for Nina Pop, Tony McDade, for George Floyd, for Ahmaud Arbery, and I ran for him again when everyone did it on the same day for 2 miles and 23 minutes on May 8th. That was 3 days after I ran 27 miles on the National Day for Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, where I fundraised money for 2 amazing organizations working to end this gender-based violence happening. But it's also really important to talk about this issue of it intersects with climate justice, because in climate justice, we're fighting to get rid of pipelines, to stop fracking, all of these dirty infrastructure projects. But when these projects are happening, such as pipelines, those pipelines bring man camps. Those man camps bring high rates of violence happening in our communities. And there's a report put out by the Sovereign Bodies Institute that is looking into these incidents and found, service providers found high rates of sex trafficking and violence happening in the nearby towns where the tribes are, and high rates of, Indigenous women and girls, little kids, going through this pain and these violence and being trafficked. And so when we're talking about climate justice and social, economic, and racial justice, this also includes missing and murdered Indigenous women, because the more these projects get proposed, and if they do get put in, this is going to, bring violence and to bring not only just destruction to Unchimakal, Grandmother Earth, but it's going to bring destruction to our bodies. And, violence against the earth is violence against women. And that's what I really am passionate about, and working to really try to address and raise awareness and continue talking about that and bringing that into the conversation of climate justice and environmentalism, because it is everything.
Thank you so much for that very thoughtful answer, and I hope people consider that and definitely take action and get involved. So I'm gonna start mixing in some of the audience Q&A and direct it at some of our panelists who I didn't get to ask your individual questions yet. So I'm going to start with a question that says, Diandra mentioned a survey showing the demographic percentage breakdown for environmentalists. Where is this data referenced? And I can I'm sure we could all kind of answer that, because for me, I think it's just working at some of the largest environmental organizations in the world, like many of us have, being in some of the biggest marches, environmental marches, and maybe just looking around and not seeing a lot of people that looked like us. But where did you get that kind of statement from? Is it personal experience or?
Yeah, so actually I've been really enjoying, there is a kind of like an article series happening that I've really been enjoying. You all probably would enjoy checking it out. It's written by Drew Costley. His last name is Costley, and he basically started this 1-0 project on Medium. So he's just posting these articles on Medium, and he is basically curating a lot of data that helps to really showcase the landscape with which we all, like BIPOC communities, have with the relationship with the environment. And one of the articles that I read was kind of showcasing the breakdown of how communities perceive climate change. So he positioned the Latinx community as being the most concerned about climate change, followed by the Black community, followed by the white community. And those are the ones that he listed here, but there are a lot of really great resources just within that whole collection of articles. So I highly recommend checking it out on Medium.
Thank you. And this question is for Teju, Tori, and Tayina. So who are some thinkers or books or films or podcasts that you go to for guidance when it comes to intersectional environmentalism and climate justice with a lens of dismantling white supremacy? Because I know there are some people, I won't mention specifically, but maybe last name Abby, that may have had problematic pasts when it comes to not necessarily treating people of color well, but also being really great environmentalists. So who are some people that you all specifically look up to get your information?
I want to start with saying that I just listened to the Yikes podcast with Michaela, Leah, and Marie, the latest episode of the Yikes podcast, which is run by Michaela Loach and Joe Becker. I highly recommend that podcast as a sort of like starting point for all things climate justice, refugee rights, like intersectionality, all of it. They're really, really concise and clear. They explain definitions. The language that they use is really accessible, and they're just delightful people to listen to. And yeah, Leah was on a podcast with Michaela and Marie, Waste Free Marie, recently. So that is a go-to for me. So yeah, I would highly recommend the Yikes podcast. Also, before kind of letting the other attendees speak, I just want to be mindful of kind of, I know that a lot of people are speaking about Black and Brown communities being centralized in like the fight for climate justice, but I also want to raise awareness about non-Black or Brown POC, like specifically Chinese communities are the ones that I can speak more confidently on. I grew up on the border of Shenzhen, which is mainland China, and as a result of global North capitalism, you know, the amount of manufacturing and air pollution that it's just prolific in that part of the world, and so much of the demand from, I guess, these westernized communities as well is putting such a huge pressure on a lot of people in this part of the world that, you know, you are seeing higher rates of like lung cancer, and you're seeing higher rates of, you know, respiratory illness and pulmonary disease. So I just want to be mindful that if we're speaking of kind of marginalizations of people of color communities, it's also beyond that which is non-Black or Brown. And also, you know, my Taiwanese side of the family is Indigenous as well, and they were settling in what used to be called Formosa, and then was subsequently colonized as well by white colonizers. So we definitely have a history of like systematic oppression, and also kind of the way that the communities are now unfavored in terms of like white colonial people still existing in these territories. There's a larger percentage of these folks who are subjugated to environmental degradation and like all sorts of other carcinogens and negative things associated with that.
Thank you. And Teju, like, because you have such a cool area of work, like mapping and geography, I think I remember meeting you maybe at PGM1, and it just clicked because I remember just hearing about all the rad things that you do. But who are some of the people that you look up to get information from, that you would like to direct some of our listeners to?
Mm-hmm. There are several, but I'll name two resources. The first is Carolyn Finney, and she is a Black woman geographer who talks about the relationship of Black people to land. She has a book called Black Faces, White Spaces, and so when we're thinking about relationships of Black bodies to land, we have to think about reparations being Black people healing their relationship to the land. And then on the other end of that, reparations returning land to Indigenous folks. And so the other source that I want to name is called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a book by Robin Wall Kimmer, and it talks about the relationship Indigenous communities have to the land and the stewardship practices that they have held over centuries.
Thank you so much. And Tayina, we didn't get to get into this too much, but I think public health is so important to be considered, and its intersections with environmentalism and social justice, and also just kind of the triple meaning of the phrase "I can't breathe" right now for Black people in this country, not being able to breathe because of corona. We're in a pandemic that attacks the respiratory system. Also, like you all have so brilliantly referenced, the particulate matter in the air, and also unfortunately being killed and murdered by police. So Black and brown people and all POC are facing this triple threat of not being able to breathe and survive. And this is definitely a public health crisis. And with our last 10 minutes, I would love for you to get into that a little bit more, and how that intersects with, well, not intersects with, but is intersectional environmentalism and a really important component of it.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, my journey with environmentalism and seeing the fact that pollution is affecting people of color more so than other communities has been seeing people come into the office. I'm working with a patient and realizing that as much treatment as I can give them in this situation, they're just going to come back, and everyone else in that community is just going to come back. So for me, it's been a lot of talking to other students and also other administrators, trying to say part of medicine is being an environmentalist. It's getting to the problem before it's in our clinic. Another thing I'd like to mention is, as Genesis mentioned, she talked about veganism and how great that is for the environment. And that's also kind of what started me on my path to environmentalism, but it's also part of my practice of medicine as it prevents diseases. But I really can't prevent those diseases if we have food deserts. So I think all of this is very connected. And
I think you may have been muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. As I was saying, just finding a way to use medicine as a way to prevent disease and help those people. I think you're muted now.
Oops. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I would love to just ask some of these questions and go through them really quickly. So try to keep your answers on the shorter side. I also have a hard stop in 8 minutes, but I'm talking a lot. Okay, so what's a good way to convince people that they should care about climate change? And about a sentence or two. For me, I would just say, because you should, you know, this is our home, so you should care about our home. But what's a way that you would convince people to care about the earth?
I think it's, as you said, it's your home. You would think you would want to keep that safe. You would think you would want to keep, you know, future generations safe. I think if people see it as more of not just an immediate problem, but thinking of how their direct family will be affected, I think that might help them.
Absolutely. And this is kind of summarizing a question that we got, but what's a way that people can avoid white saviorism when it comes to helping marginalized communities? If anyone has a few tips on allyship versus white saviorism.
I definitely think that I've worked in various spaces where it's been very white-led, both in the fashion space and in the social impact space. And I think it's really important to make sure that if you are a white-led organization or a group trying to, I guess, either in the social impact space or honestly, even in like a marketing or campaign space, right? In both regards, I think it's really important to make sure that you're really consulting with the appropriate people before enacting any initiatives or trying to create something that's like culturally significant, because there have just been, I mean, for those of you in the fashion space, there have just been so many, and I say fashion because that's typically something that's more forward facing as opposed to like behind the scenes and examples that we can't always like all understand. So fashion being something that's so consumer facing, we've seen so many atrocious examples of things happening when the appropriate people are not consulted. So that's what I would say there.
I would also add to think about the nuance and specificity of the community you're trying to connect with. There are not universal solutions necessarily to climate activism in all of the geographies and all of the places in which people are struggling and who have experienced violence and exploitation, and also recognize your own privilege and agency and what resources you have to redistribute towards justice, because it's not so much about helping the other, but thinking about the ways that you yourself can redistribute some of the things that you have, and recognizing your privilege and positionality in these conversations, and learning as much as possible about the ways that your family, your history, your identity is complicit in these systems. And rather than feeling guilty, we want to move to a sense of collective accountability. So I think already having the perspective of shifting from guilt to action is one way to be a good ally.
And yeah, I was reading some interesting comments, so sorry for that facial expression, but I think you all basically answered the question of allyship, because there's a question that says, should white people be included in the movement? And I think you all answered that. And if to sum it up, yes, white people are included in the movement. They have always been included in the environmental movement. And we're suggesting that you allow, or we're actually demanding that we be allowed to have space within that movement. So I don't think it's a question of whether white people should be included. It's a question of, or a statement that we should also be included in this movement. And really quickly, Genesis, there's a question for you from a young environmentalist. What are some of your favorite organizations that you would recommend so young people can also get involved?
Well, the one that I've been working on is Youth Climate Safe. So if anyone wants to get involved in that, that's basically, we're just focusing on talking about the destruction that animal agriculture has on the planet and the impact that that makes on climate change. So I think if anyone wants to get involved in that, you can just reach out to Youth Climate Safe, their Instagram account, and then you guys can start chapters, and we have other kids that are also starting chapters, so you'll have a support group also.
Thank you so much. And also, as we wrap up, all of these people have really incredible platforms, and I just want to remind people that it takes a lot of emotional labor sometimes to even make an Instagram post that kind of delves into some of your personal experiences and how they relate to environmentalism. So instead of maybe flooding us with your DMs, sometimes, you know, we're here to answer them. Try to do the work and listen to these things that we've told you, read our resources that we put out there, and then I feel like people might be more likely to want to conversate when you've done the work. And I feel like when you do the work, then you can spread that within your own community and make it a lot easier for people like us to continue to do our work without, because I love educating people, I love that so much, but I also want to be able to fight for the climate, you know, full time. And yeah, I think that would help a lot of us when it comes to emotional labor. But with our 3 minutes, we could do a rapid fire of you all's Instagram handles if you'd like, and also the organizations that you would like people to support and check out. So Tori, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. My Instagram is @Tori Choi_, so that is TORI TSUI_. And I'm gonna plug the organization that I work with or work for, and that's at Sail for Climate Action. It is kind of in the process of being rebranded, but stay tuned, there's some really exciting things on the horizon. So that's at Sail, so SAIL, and then for Climate Action.
Awesome. And Tayina?
My Instagram handle where I talk about medicine and environmentalism is called Sustainably Studious. And also, if you would like to hear voices from other people with a similar viewpoint, you could also go to the organization Medical Students for Environmental Justice.
Sweet. And Teju?
My Instagram handle is at Miss Tej, MISSTEJ. And you could go to my website as well because I offer trainings and workshops on interconnected environmentalism and Black liberation.
I don't know if we're all in order, but go, go, go.
So my handle is Diandra Marizet, and I know that it says Diandra here, but Marizet is Marizet. And I actually recommend for those of you who are more interested in the way that fashion is currently impacting the planet, I recommend going and following Remake. And for a more holistic view of intersectionality, please go follow the new account, Intersectional Environmentalist.
You can follow me at Queer Brown Vegan if you're just interested in ever learning about anything about environmentalism, and definitely check out all the people I follow. They're Black, Indigenous, people of color, so much amazing environmentalists that are doing awesome work. And shout out to Alluvia Magazine. Check them out. They're BIPOC environmental magazine. So thank you.
Oh, I also just wanted to quickly shout out Sustain the Mag. They've been doing a very good job of just including a lot of different diverse voices.
I guess I'll go. My Instagram handle is I'm Kevin J Patel, lowercase I and M Kevin J Patel. And then if you want to follow my organization, it's at One Up Action.
My Instagram is at Genesis Butler, and there's just an underscore at the end. And then if you want to get involved in youth climate safe, you can follow the Instagram account and just reach out to it.
Hi everyone, I'm Jordan. My Instagram is at native, NATIVENIN_LA, and at rising_hearts for the Rising Hearts Coalition. And definitely feel free to reach out. I try to always check the messages and check the requests. I'm definitely always open for collaborations and just getting to expand, our coalition and what we can do and help provide just creating space and opportunities for our voices to be heard at climate and social, racial, economic justice.
And if you want to learn more about intersectional environmentalism, please follow all of these people. And I also started, with the help of Diandra, this really awesome platform. Well, I think it's awesome. You might not, but I think it is. It's called Intersectional Environmentalist, and I hope you all follow it. And thank you so, so much for coming today to listen to us share our stories and amplify our voices. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Wopila, thank you.